I watched the Netflix latest sort of vegan propaganda thing on the twin study. I think it's called You Are What You Eat or something along those lines.
It's called You Are What You Eat, a twin experiment.
Netflix docuseries, You Are What You Eat, the twin experiment.
You know, the premise supposedly was this is study on twins and comparing them and showing the outcomes. But really that was sort of the veneer under which a huge vegan massive propaganda campaign was waged.
Was there an ulterior motive at play here?
Debunked by multiple people now?
Why the new Netflix show, You Are What You Eat, is a vegan PR stunt based on flawed science.
Is the vegan diet really the best, based on a Stanford twin study?
Vegan propaganda, bad science.
Don't be fooled by films, by documentaries that have an underlying agenda.
I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and welcome back to Dr. Westman Reacts. If you don't have my top 10 tips on how to start keto right, please look in the description below. You know, this massively popular Netflix series, and I watched the first episode, and I couldn't go any further than that because, well, then I went to research about it. I read Nina Teicholz's Substack, Reddit article about it. I read the Wikipedia article about it. There's already Wikipedia has the movie in there, and Wikipedia says that it's You Are What You Eat, a twin experiment, is a 2024 American vegan documentary series. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's what it is. It really is vegan propaganda. Looking back, based on Nina Teicholz's investigative work, and best I can tell, it's true. One of the funders of the study, even and the documentary series, even based on the study here, was the Vogt Foundation, or VOGT Foundation. Turns out Kyle Vogt is a vegan promoter, actually gave a lot of money to fund the movie called Game Changers, which I've reviewed before, which is really a vegan propaganda. So here on the paper from November 2023, I was going to ignore this paper and kind of give Professor Gardner a free pass because it was so embarrassing. I didn't really want to talk about it. Embarrassing because they're using an outcome that's out of date. To just look at an LDL cholesterol as the be-all, end-all of cardiometabolic risk is like going back 40 years. In a twist of irony, the metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance was kind of discovered and promoted and papers done about it at Stanford. Jerry Reven, and another twist of irony is that Professor Gardner is the Farquhar Professor of Medicine, and Farquhar worked with Reven, and they were focusing on triglyceride and HDL as the main cardiometabolic risk factor. So it's like there are blinders on, or Professor Gardner was basically purchased. So we're basically seeing industry and this plant-based initiative that Nina Teicholz unearthed, and you go to the website and there is a plant-based initiative at Stanford led by Christopher Gardner, and the purpose of it is to show how plant-based diets can replace animal-based diets. And so I'm a little concerned because if I were going to be funded by a plant-based group and I was going to be asked to design a study that showed a vegan diet was healthy or even better, I would do a short-term study. Because all of the concerns about a vegan diet that the rest of the medical community has is about the long-term effects of a vegan diet. Because you have to be very careful about vitamin B12. And the long-term effects are what we were worried about. So if I was going to do a study that would be favorable, I would do a short one. And so this study is 8 weeks long. 8 weeks long. And yet it is, the conclusion is that the cardiometabolic effects of the vegan diet was better than the omnivore diet. Well, the other thing I would do in a study would be to choose a control group where I thought they wouldn't have much effect. And so, curious, they didn't do a control group that was keto. Well, so actually, from Stanford's group, there is a paper that looks at the extreme ultra low fat, ultra low carb, or keto, and they have similar metabolic effects. So if I was going to design a study to show the vegan was better than the control diet, I wouldn't choose a keto diet, although I could choose the keto diet and use LDL, which is a out-of-date, incomplete, and really inadequate assessment of cardiometabolic risk. So I wanted to ignore this paper because really it was kind of embarrassing. But now there's this Netflix series that is based on the paper. It's in the title of the Netflix series, a twin experiment. And they're using this as using the Stanford name, using this really inadequate science to basically talk about how bad meat is to eat, how the animals are raised in a poor way. They take you to the cattle industry, the hog industry. What does that have to do with the twin experiment? So actually, Wikipedia is spot on. It's a vegan documentary series. So it's not going to shed any more light on what the healthiest diet is. But it's kind of a case study in how do you design a study to make your approach look really good. Do a short-term one, 8 weeks. Now, in our first study in 2002 on the low-carb diet, we did a 6-month study. And even then we were criticized that a 6-month study wasn't long enough. So there are now studies that go out a year that are controlled trials, randomized trials on low-carb diets. We don't see that in this study or even among vegan diets. They just don't have that randomized trial data. Or if they do, the control group is the standard American diet. And it's kind of curious because Professor Gardner did one of the most important studies across the whole spectrum of carb and fat intake. It was called the A to Z trial, and Atkins to zone. Years ago, probably forgot about it, I suppose, but it really showed that all the diets had some benefit. And when Professor Gardner gets up, I mean, he does admit or acknowledge that there are a lot of diets that work. But if I was going to design, if I was funded to design a study to show that the vegan diet was best, I would focus on LDL cholesterol, which is what they did. And this is not an adequate outcome. It does not represent cardiometabolic risk in modern day terms. It's more complicated than that. They could have used any kind of other metric that includes triglyceride, HDL. If you go to these online calculators of metabolic risk, they don't even have the LDL calculated as one of the variables you put in. So you would do a short-term study, have a control group that you know is not going to do very good, and then you tout the meat eating is something that is killing the environment. So basically already in this first episode, we're being shown the trees in the Amazon rainforest being brought down, and the fellow the founder of the Impossible Meat or Impossible Burger is interviewed and says every time you eat a hamburger, you can imagine that a tree falls in the Amazon. Well, I wish it were that simple. It's really not. And so I'm afraid I have to call out that Professor Gardner, I think you're getting purchased here, wittingly or unwittingly, although Professor Gardner is openly a vegan for the last 40 years, which is another kind of conflict or bias. I don't mind conflicts. We all have conflicts. Getting back to that professorship idea, that Professor Farquhar and Reven would be upset with you, Professor Gardner, if you didn't include triglyceride and HDL in your assessment of cardiometabolic risk. They're professors at Stanford. At Duke, years ago, the widow of Dr. Atkins came to 7 universities, including Duke, and they endowed a professorship. So several $1 million is given, and a certain percentage of that is given to a professor, pretty much in perpetuity. And what happened at Duke, and even though Mrs. Atkins, I knew her at the time, I knew Dr. Atkins, actually asked him for research money years ago. Mrs. Atkins told the dean in my presence that she wanted the professorship to go to Dr. Westman, which is me, a younger me. And the dean said, well, I'll do the best I can. A committee at Duke gave the professorship to somebody else who doesn't study the Atkins diet. And in fact, the word on the street was, if the funding comes in from a source like Atkins, they will never study the Atkins diet with that money. I mean, that would be being controlled by the outside forces, which I respected. I know that there was intention that, and I felt like there was going to be a professorship there for me, but I, am part of an academic university and part of a team effort, and it went to somebody else, and that money was never used to study the Atkins diet. Opposed to now, the Stanford study and the Vote Foundation and the Plant-Based Diet Initiative is entirely funded by outside, well, I won't say entirely, majorly funded by plant-based folks who have a vested interest financially to make the vegan diet look good. It's control, it's influence, it's basically buying off academia. I thought that was only really being done by drug companies, but it's not. Well, they do it too. But I have to say I'm disappointed that I was going to give Professor Gardner a free pass, but almost like, these things happen in plain sight. Once now there's a Netflix series that's, millions of people are watching. I thought this little paper would just kind of fade away because it was so bad. No, that's not what happened. So this doesn't help shed any light on a keto diet or low-carb metabolism, and it doesn't even compare the vegan diet to what we feel is a very good diet to reduce cardiometabolic risk. Maybe they'll do another one. I mean, that would be the challenge, They did a secondary review of the DietFits trial, and the very low-carb diet and the very low-fat diets both were effective. Both had value in reducing insulin resistance. So maybe this could be redone, or, but when you think about it, bringing in these twins and having a camera crew follow this study all along, even though it was designed with a totally inadequate outcome of LDL-C cholesterol, it really kind of smacks of using the university experiment for propaganda, and that's just really sad. Sorry, Professor Gardner, this is a bad one. I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and if you like this video, press like, press subscribe so you don't miss out on any of these insights. And if you don't have my top 10 ways to start a keto diet the right way, please look in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.